wanted to welcome everybody to the May 2026 edition. The year's almost halfway over, hard to believe, of the B2B Growth Show. And we've got a really great topic in store for you today. We're going to be talking about messaging and positioning. And we have one of the very best messaging and positioning experts I know, and that's Grant Gooding. And Grant is one of our partners, and he knows all about how to run workshops and how to really get to the heart of what matters to our customers. As I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, Grant is actually a repeat guest. So without further ado, I just wanted to introduce you, Grant, to the team. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, of course. Thank you, Paul. It's good to see you again. You too, Lauren.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. And you know, Grant is one of those guys that's like a neuroscience expert. And some of the things that he's going to share with us today, actually, he learned from the CIA. I'm not going to go into too much about that today, but we do have an agenda. I'll let you talk about it a little bit later on, Grant. We do have an agenda. We're going to share that with you a couple of times as we go through today. You can follow along in that agenda. There's also links to really important resources there, like Grant and his team over at Proof Positioning write some really great articles. I've got a link to his blog down at the bottom. I also recommend that you follow Grant. He's got great information that he shares on LinkedIn. We've got a link to his LinkedIn profile, so be sure to follow along on that. That's all there in the agenda. I also wanted to let you know that we have a really big show in store for June. And so we've got Rand Fishkin, who's like the godfather of SEO and the godfather of B2B marketing, is actually going to be joining us in June. And he's going to be talking about the clickless future. I'm sure you guys are aware. If you look at your Google Analytics or look at any of your dashboards, clicks are down. Buyers are not clicking as much as they used to. And the reason for that is they just don't need to come to our websites anymore. They've got other ways to get to that information, from social media to talking to their peers to asking AI, God forbid. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit today too, Grant. But there's a link to register for the June show. It's at the bottom of the agenda. So be sure to register for that. It's going to be a really big show. But excited for that. Let me go ahead and introduce you to our moderators today. One face that's really familiar. I hope we can keep her attention all day long because her mind is in Europe right now. Her brain is in Paris. She is going to be gone in just a couple of days for a nice week-long trip in Paris. But Lauren's joining us today on the Riverside webinar part, and she's going to moderate. You want to say hi, Lauren?
Yeah, hi, everybody. And then, Paul, before I introduce myself, can you hear me well enough? Because someone in LinkedIn said my volume was down. So just volume check. Are we good on my side?
I can hear you just fine. Grant, can you hear Lauren?
Excellent.
Thumbs up.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. So, yeah, it's great to be here today. I've dropped the agenda in the chat for everybody. Jessica, who is not in Riverside, she's actually moderating on LinkedIn, has dropped the agenda over on the LinkedIn side if you're joining us from there. But yeah, I'm just really excited to talk messaging today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the first thing as you're following along on the agenda, the first topic is Survey Says. And one of the things that I love that we've been doing, I think, what did we start this back in the fall, Lauren, where we actually have folks as they're registering kind of fill out a survey. It's voluntary. You don't have to do it. But I think we had almost 60 people fill out the survey this go round. And it was all about messaging and how do you get insights from your customers and how do you really learn what it is that we should be saying to our customers. And I thought there were some really interesting insights there. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me get it pulled up. And Grant, I'd love to get your perspective on this too. I'm going to just share my screen real quick.
Paul, you're going to show me some research. What are you trying to be friends?
Yeah. You know, I kind of felt like, you know, research is an important thing. We shouldn't just pull things out of the air. Maybe we actually try to figure some things out, get some insights. And so we heard from 53 folks that I think we had almost 200 people register for today's event. About 53 of you guys filled out the survey. Thank you for that. There were several questions on there, but Grant, some interesting things here, especially related to what we're going to talk about today. The first one is about half of the folks that filled out the survey said that they do some form of research, actually do surveys, just like this survey. I thought that was pretty interesting. And then over there on the left side right here, love to get your comments on that, but still about half of the folks, and I would put myself in this camp too, feel like their messaging isn't resonating. So we're doing surveys, but we still kind of feel like it's not hitting the mark. Any thoughts on that?
That's not surprising at all. I appreciate that 47% of folks are willing to admit the fact that they thought their messaging was too generic, because you're wildly biased by the messaging that you select to take to market, because if you didn't think it was good, you wouldn't do it. So the fact that they're at least able to admit that's really good. And then that little stat right below it, Paul, turning
right here,
findings into action. That's
yeah.
the hardest. That's the hardest part. If you can't turn it into action, it's not worth anything. So yeah, I could talk a little bit about that later if you want.
Yeah, let's definitely get into it. You know, one of the interesting things about messaging and positioning, and why I love to do this show with you, Grant, every year. Maybe we can talk you into coming back again next year. Is that messaging's like the very first thing. If we cannot speak our customers' language, and we can't figure out what kind of messages are going to resonate and make them stop scrolling or pay attention to our ads or read our blog or whatever, nothing else downstream is going to work. That's why messaging is like our first pillar when we work with clients. We got to figure out who your customer is and what message is going to resonate, because we can't really optimize your pipeline. We can't do anything else until we have the right words that matter, that are going to get the attention of our buyers. So I'm excited to dig into that with you today. So let me stop sharing. I want to make sure we can see everybody's faces as we go through this. And let's jump into the first big topic, and that is the gap, right? And we kind of touched on it. Certainly our audience is feeling it. And by the way, I'm not surprised that we got those great answers. A lot of folks that come to these growth shows, Grant, they come every single month. They know this is a safe place where they can be honest and really learn something. So, but one thing that we do recognize is there is a gap, right? We think we know what our customers want to hear from us. And so we get in a room, we come up with, hey, how do we say this? Or what are the problems that our customers have? And then we build out our marketing campaigns. Maybe we build a persona, and then we launch a campaign and we get crickets, right? Because there's a disconnect. There's this gap between what we think our customers want to hear from us and what they actually want to hear from us. Can you share a little bit on your thoughts related to that?
Yeah. So first of all, it's harder than it seems. So not to say that this is something that you should get right. It's a lot harder than people think. And there's a few reasons why. To let you know, statistically, so we've been keeping track of this over about 600 studies that we've done over the past about 10 years. And one of the things that we do is we say, okay, sell us, right? So when we're doing a messaging study, we have to figure out what we're working with. What are the unique value propositions? What do you do? What are all the possible reasons that someone would say, you know what? Yeah, let's go. And the probability of someone actually getting correct the most important thing to their buying audience is only about 8%. So that means, in many respects, almost, you would be more likely to get to select the thing that is most mathematically resonant with your audience is if you let a computer select it just by random number generation, because it's hard to get right. And so why is it that hard? This is one of the biggest reasons. When you work in an organization, right, whether you're the one that designed the workflows and the product or the service or whatever it is, or if you're just, someone that works at the company, you are wildly biased on how things operate in the company and the things that lead to success. And what we do is we accidentally project our perception of that thing as being valuable to the customer. For instance, one of the biggest, most obvious, easy things that people should not talk about is when they say things like, we're an ESOP. You see it right there. You've seen clients and they've got it right there in their logo, an employee-owned company, right? Or a family-owned business. And so what we know that if you work in that company, boy, things just would not operate as cleanly. Our turnover would be so much higher if we weren't an ESOP or weren't a family-owned business. And so without those things, we wouldn't be able to be where we are today. And it is that critical element that allows this company to be successful. And we believe that, probably because it's very true. So what do? We tell people that. That's the first thing that comes out of our mouth in the pitch. We tell the salespeople, tell them we're an employee-owned company. What we don't understand is if the person on the other side of the table is like, who gives a shit? What does that have to do with me? The output of your company is the only thing that I care about, and that is the only thing that you should consider. Because if being an ESOP or an employee-owned company was the end-all, be-all, all those companies would be kicking everybody's ass right now. But it's not. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. So look, take an ESOP, employee-owned company, and write it on the inside of the walls and inside the four walls of your company as big and as beautiful as you want. But the probability of that thing driving emotional resonance in a prospect or a customer is, well, it's not. We've been measuring it for years. We have an article on our site called "Your Customers Don't Care About You," if you want to see the math. The probability of those things resonating is so low, it's almost zero.
It's interesting. It's that bias. Just take your example of an ESOP, right? We employees in an ESOP, it's the oxygen we breathe. We can connect the dots between how does that translate into value to our customer, but our customers aren't breathing the same oxygen that we're breathing every day, right? They're not part of that culture. They cannot see or connect the dots between how does that translate into something that's meaningful to me. And we can't, it almost feels like listening to you talk about that, Grant. We can't see it. We can't understand it because it is the oxygen we breathe. We know that means something, but we don't know how to translate that into how does that matter to me? What's in it for, how does you being an ESOP make my world better, right?
Yeah. So there are these things called value proposition units. And those are what you're kind of getting at softly is there's something about us being an ESOP that does have potential value, right? It is our internal identification of a competitive advantage, but it's not that you're an ESOP. It's that because you're an ESOP, things happen. Your employees act a way that is different, that could be perceived as being differentiated from customers. And it is those individualized types of things that do provide value. I could talk to you a little bit more about those if you want, about what value proposition units are.
I think we'll get down to that here in a little bit. Right now, I'd love to kind of just, and maybe we can land the plane here, just understanding there's a gap. And I would love, if you feel like there's a gap in the marketing messages that you have or the information you're sharing on your website or in social media versus what you think actually resonates with your buyer, just say yes or gap in the chat. I'd love to see that. Because I mean, personally, Grant, I feel it every day, and I'm in this world. I've been in this world for 25 years, and Lauren and I can get together, or other people in the team, and we can brainstorm on, oh my gosh, this is going to resonate. This is the greatest messaging ever. And then we get out there and we throw dollars behind it, and crickets. And I 8%. Think it goes back to what you said. It's like we think we know, but we really don't know. So how do we learn those things? Like what is the way to get out of ourselves, right? To get away from ourselves and actually start learning what matters to them?
Well, so there's the 8% math I was talking about.
Yeah.
Right. You have no perspective. Everything like something that everyone needs and no one has is perspective, right? That is what makes humanity go around. And we just don't have it. We're completely biased by the paint color and the inside of the four walls of our business. So and we're trying to predict what people see on the outside. So that's what our entire research methodology is essentially based on. One of the things I think that most people get wrong is they don't understand how the brain of the buyer actually works. One of the biggest mistakes is that we believe that logic and reason is where it's at, right? If we can make a logical argument, it's difficult for someone to say no. And nothing could be further from the truth. Every decision we make, regardless of its complexity and regardless of its severity or impact on our life, is all made with the dumbest part of our brain, which is the limbic system back here, right? It's literally the opposite side of the brain. That limbic system in the is where our emotions and our memories and our beliefs all exist. And the logic part of our brain's up here in the frontal lobe of the neocortex. And that part of the brain physiologically cannot even make a decision, right? So you can look up Antonio Damasio's work there. But so essentially, if you are making a logical argument or something you believe to be a logical argument, you're literally activating a part of the brain that can't make a decision. Its job is really only to process options. So you get a lot of, imagine you're activating the thinking brain instead of the action brain. It's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do, but that's what everybody does.
So are you saying that the limbic part of the brain is the action part of the brain? That's where we're going to take action? Is that what you're saying?
Yep. It's where your emotions, really, your job is to align with the emotions and the beliefs of the people that are across from you, right? Human beings are just giant sort of bags of beliefs. Most of those beliefs are, and there's not just a few, right? Don't look at belief as being some big thing. There are tiny, tiny, tiny beliefs that exist that are really, really important to get right. The example I always use to be funny, but is also completely true, is there's a correct way to load a dishwasher, and I don't know what it is, right? My wife knows. She also knows the right way to fold a towel. I don't know that way either, right? But we believe that there is a correct way that things should happen, or there's a correct way that a salesperson should ask, and if we meet that belief, good things are going to happen. People are going to buy. If you conflict with that, you create something called cognitive dissonance, which means without even realizing it, you're making someone uncomfortable. And you may not realize it, and they may not realize it. Why is this so uncomfortable?
Yeah,
it's subconscious, and and sometimes it's not so unconscious or subconscious, like a political argument. You're like, has anybody ever won a political argument? It doesn't exist because it's two beliefs clashing, right? There's no, oh yeah, well, you made the right argument, therefore I'm on your team now. That's not how humans work. So if you could figure out, like, what is my customer's expectation? How do they believe I should behave if I want to sell them something? If you know that, it's really cheating.
Yeah, it's interesting because our guest last month was a great sales coach, Jen Ellen Knuth, and she touched on a very similar concept, but she did not go into the brain science like you are a little bit, Grant, but it was the same idea. She said almost 40% of B2B deals are not lost to competitors. They're lost to inaction. And they're lost to inaction because we focus on the logical side. Like we have the best product, and here's A, B, C, D, E, and F to prove that our product is better than everybody else's. And she would literally said last month, sometimes you can lose a deal where the buyer will say, I do believe that your solution is the better solution, but I'm still not going to buy from you. And her argument was the cost of inaction, because the buyer has too much risk involved with making that decision. Even though they may believe your solution is 10 times better than a spreadsheet, the spreadsheet's good enough, and there's no political capital that I might lose if we make that decision and it turns out to be a really bad deciison.
Yeah, I wrote it back to what Deanne was saying that I accidentally showed on the screen, but it's all, since it's we're all basing ourselves off risk, that brain that we all developed, that humans developed early on, was very much save myself from the tiger, and that's kind of how we make decisions. Yeah,
we actually call it the lion. We're both right. Doesn't matter, but that's exactly right. We wrote an article only for our agency partners, but you can still see it on our website. It's called "Why Good Agencies Lose Deals They Should Win," and it's because of what you were just saying, Paul. They come in and they go, "I want to convince you that that we're better. This is our system. This is our process. This is what we're going to do," and they don't realize the entire point of them being there is to eliminate uncertainty. If you can eliminate uncertainty, you will win more deals. You'll win more RFPs. You'll win more projects. You will win more. But we don't do that. we go in and we start bloviating about how great we are. No one cares. If you can eliminate uncertainty in the mind of the person that's across from you, your sale is yours to lose.
Yeah. So let's connect the dots there. And Lauren, I think you touched on it. So we've just established the fact that shiny trinkets and more features and better features and a faster car doesn't guarantee a sale, but eliminating risk or removing ambiguity helps. What is that doing in our brain? Connect those dots for me, Grant. Why is helping them make a safe decision better than making the best decision or the
because we're in a risk-averse species, period. We won't admit it. We don't think that we are, but it is the greatest motivator. So it's just, if we're in a, like, so we're a research partner. We work a lot with agencies, and the agencies are handling a lot of stuff. I know that if I'm in the meeting, my only job is to listen to what the client is saying and figure out what are they scared of. That's all I'm trying to figure out. Because if I can figure out what they're scared of, I can put them at ease. And if I put them at ease, I mathematically am increasing the probability of getting the project. And by the way, our win rate when we're working with agencies and we do this is incredibly high, because we're doing something nobody else is doing, which is finding the aversion, finding the fear, and impacting it directly.
Right. Because at the end of the day, we are selling to people. Like, companies don't sell to companies sell to people, and people are worried about their jobs. They're worried about their career. They're worried about a lot of things, and we need to help them feel good that this is the best way for them to go. And I think is that all limbic there, or what is that's causing them to be so fear-based, or not necessarily fear-based, but wanting to be protected?
So the limbic system is the most developed part of our brain, but it's the reptilian brain. Like, for instance, why does differentiation work so well? Why is the holy grail of marketing finding differentiation? The reason is because our brains are genetically predisposed to identify things that are different. And the whole reason of that is to risk aversion. Like, when I say it's a lion, not a tiger, we say, is that a lion in the grass? Our brain's job fundamentally is to keep us alive. Really, that's it. Eliminate risk at all costs. Every system, every physiological system we have is to identify and mitigate risk, because that's what increases our survival. We just happen to be this bizarre species that can also do geometry and engineering and build tall buildings. So we solved so many problems that we don't realize that like, we're so far away from survival that we don't realize that part of our brain still is in charge.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that, and then we can move on to the next topic. One is, differentiation is a big deal, and you've heard even in the last decade or so the concept of category creation, like create a category. Instead of being the CRM software and competing in that same category as every other CRM software, become the CRM software for dentists, or become the CRM software for this, that, or the other thing. And the idea is so that you're differentiated and you can message in a relevant way to a niche audience. And I do believe that there's some value there, but I feel like, man, we've taken it so far that people are coming up with new words to just describe the same thing. I mean, gosh, in the marketing world, we're always reinventing, what we call our things just to create a new word or a new category. So you've got that challenge, but then we have the other challenge that has to do with, one thing that we say at Vendy all the time: we have to win mind share before market share. And what we mean by that is helping our client understand the problem that we solve so that they file us away in a mental filing cabinet. When they have that problem, they'll pull us out and go, oh yeah, I'm going to call Vendy, or oh yeah, I'm going to call Grant because they solve these problems. How do we deal with that? I mean, how do we deal with differentiation? Because I understand the value of that, but not get so differentiated they don't know where to file us away in their brain.
Well, most of the time, if the file system in the brain really is looking for just objectivity. So most of the time, if you are, even if you're being overly differentiated, it's still good. There's a cool book that was written by a guy named Jack Reese is his name. He was the guy that wrote like the 22 Immutable Laws of Branding. He was the guy that got me really into reading more about psychology when it comes to marketing 20 years ago. And he had a book called The Origin of Brands. It is a brilliant book because what he did was equate how the mind operates and how we gravitate towards differentiated brands and how that works in relationship to Darwin's Origin of Species. It seems kind of heady as I just described it, but it's absolutely true. And it's a really brilliant, it's one of those books that you read and you're like, whoa. And, it didn't get a whole lot of play for whatever reason, but it should have.
Well, I have not read that book, so I'm going to have to go read it now. What was it
I know,
called again?
Nobody has. The Origin of Brands.
The Origin of Brands. Yeah, I'll buy that today. Well, let's continue to move on because we've been in this concept of how does the brain work and how do we position ourselves in a way to elicit a desire for a customer to want to do business with us. But the next topic kind of goes back to what we learned on the survey, and that's this research trap. I think we've established, Grant, you've done a great job of establishing, hey, our customers think about things differently than we do. Our customers' motives are different than what we think they are. They're not breathing the oxygen that we breathe. So now we need to go out into the world and try to figure out from them what really matters. And that's when we start doing things like surveys or hiring an agency to do research. But oftentimes that goes wrong. Why does it go wrong?
Well, part of the problem, I would say, is easy access to tools. So if you're sitting around having a conversation with your leadership team and someone says, we should ask our customers that, like, we're sitting around debating it, why don't we just ask? Well, anybody can put together a survey or a questionnaire or pick up the phone and call somebody. I mean, like, this is not hard to do. But that doesn't mean they're qualified to do it either. So one of the reason I said I wasn't surprised when you showed that stat that said that 39% of people say that they don't know how to turn their research into action is because they don't start with that in mind, right? And you have to kind of, just like anything, if you know what you're doing, you're going to do a good job. We've done over 800 studies in about 14 years. And, that's enough to screw it up a time or two and be pretty good at it. So if you understand that action is the ultimate goal, you know how to ask the right questions without biasing people. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is the data is going to come back. You all are going to sit in a room and there's going to be a pie chart on the screen and you all look at each other and be like, great, now we know this thing. And you all be saying to themselves, or maybe out loud, what the hell do we do now? And that's because turning the data into action is a lot harder than people think it is.
Yeah. And I know when we were working through the outline, you were sharing with me, and I've read articles on your website about elicitation. How does that kind of fit into this? And I know that you borrowed some of this from the CIA. I'd love to hear that backstory, but help us understand, what is elicitation? How does that fit into this process? How does that connect to the CIA? I'd love to hear that story.
Well, it came from when we started doing this consulting, it was, years ago, we were trying to figure out, well, there's no research methodologies that operate the way humans operate, ironically. And the whole point is to measure people, but none of the methods take into consideration how people work. So that's when we started. I mean, that's why I read so much psychology and neuroscience, because I'm a business nerd. I'm not a psychologist or a statistician or anything like that. That's what got us into Antonio Damasio's work, understanding how human decision-making operates. And one of the other rabbit holes we went down was based on a book by a guy named Jack Schaefer, who was a PhD psychologist, was a special agent at the FBI. And I read a book. His book was called The Truth Detector. And he wrote it kind of after his career about like how the CIA uses an elicitation questioning model to get the truth. So apparently what happened is he was studying like interrogation techniques post World War II and like, what are people doing? And so what they figured out was that if you ask someone a question, he used the analogy of a security guard. So a security guard pops up in your head. And you immediately go into this defense posture. Now, that's true in day-to-day world in some respects, but amplified, 1,000 times if you're in a dark room and there's a CIA interrogator in front of you, right, or somebody from the FBI. But what happens is in literally milliseconds, it takes about 200 milliseconds for the brain to actually process kind of a micro unit. So you can process these things really quickly. But something like, who's asking me this question? What's their social status? What are the potential repercussions of my answer? How much of the answer do I divulge? And you're processing all this stuff, and then something comes out of your mouth. It's not always exactly perfect or what you thought it was going to be, but something comes out of your mouth. Now, what it's unlikely to be is the truth, right? Now, there could be mostly true or partially true, but there are details that change based on our perception of the situation that we're in or who we're talking to, right? You don't talk to everybody the exact same. You sometimes change your mannerisms and you change your voice tonality and your speech if you're talking to different people. It's just the way humans are. We're adaptive. And so what he kind of figured out along with some other folks, but he kind of wrote one of the coolest books about it, I think, is if you use an elicitation questioning model, it works a lot better, which essentially is you don't ask questions. If you don't ask someone a question, that security guard in the brain doesn't pop up. And you build immediate rapport with them, and you're much more likely to get the truth. So here's what they do. So instead of asking someone an explicit question, expecting an honest answer, they'll make what they call a near truth statement. So that would be like, instead of saying, "Where were you last night?" like they do in the, like in the movies,
or my parents all the time when I was a kid.
Or were you
last night?
Yeah. So instead of that, they'll make a statement. So they'll come and sit down and say, "Look, I'm tired. I was up watching the game late last night, and I really want to get this over with." Now, what they're hoping, what will happen is someone will go, "I was watching the game too," or be like, "Can you believe that ending?" Right? Because now they know that person was watching, right? So they actually were asking a question, but they were doing it in a way that didn't appear to. So they were getting the truth. Now, the reason they're getting the truth is nobody asked them, and so they weren't in defensive mode. And humans have this innate desire to correct the record, is what they call it. And so if you make a near truth statement, someone will correct you. I use this on my 12-year-old. My 12-year-old's very cool. And I get a lot of one-word answers out of him, right? "How was school today?" "Fine." Right? "How you doing?" "Okay." So I don't do that. I'll make it a statement instead. I'll be like, "Dude, you look really good today. You must have had an awesome day." And guess what happens? He starts talking. Right? I didn't ask him anything. And this works. This is an incredibly powerful tool. We use it as our questioning model in research, where we're getting folks to react to value propositions. That's one of the ways that we measure the effectiveness of value propositions and sales messages, is using that model. But you can use this if you're a salesperson. Like, I'm not technically in a sales role necessarily, but if I was out selling, I would be using this all the time. Because you will get people to give you information that they normally would never give you. So instead of being like, "Could you tell me what your procurement process looks like?" You could be like, "So I'm sure that procurement's only going to be involved at the end, right?" I'm like, "Oh, actually, no, they'll be involved the entire time, or they'll be here at the beginning. Actually, we got to get this through them. We got to get them to check this box first." Or, "I know you probably already have a budget for this outlined in your P&L for the next fiscal year. So we'll plan on that." And they'll correct your record. "Well, actually, we don't." Right? "Oh, yeah, we do. We're fine." And a lot of times you can even see on their faces when we do this, they'll be like, "Why did I just tell them that? I just told them the budget. I can't believe I just told them the budget. Why did I do that?" And it's because you're using basic human psychology in a productive way.
Interesting. So when you work with a client to help them kind of get to the bottom of these types of issues with their customers and understand what the conversation that's going on in the head of their customers, do you have a set of statements that you come in and make, or do you kind of tailor it for every engagement based on what they're trying to, like, is there like a standard set of questions, or does it have to be tailored based on what the desired outcome is?
Yeah, it has to be tailored. Otherwise, everybody would say the same thing. So, what's interesting is most organizations are very unique if you look at them from the inside of those four walls, right? But when you look at them externally, they almost look completely identical. I mean, I use banks as an example of, can you tell me the difference between first bank and second bank? No. I mean, tell me the difference between any two banks. It's almost impossible. They're identical, right? And what's interesting is if you go inside and you experience the people and the culture inside those banks, they're very, very different. They have different goals. They have different things that they want to do. They have different systems and processes and priorities, but none of those things make it outside of the four walls of the building. And so no one really knows. So that's why banks are very, very hard to create objective differentiation. Like the ones that have, it's like, hey, we're only going to work with military families. Like that's an objective differentiator that anybody can work with military families, but they created that separation, origin of brands theory, right? Just find a branch and go own that branch. But the way that you get to what you're talking about is through value proposition units, which I said earlier, right? Most of the time we'll say things like we said, we believe our language is generic. It's because what people do is we unnecessarily genericize things that we do believe to be powerful or meaningful to the customer. And we use words like trust, which is an absolutely no-go word. Customer service, which is nonsense.
But we have the best customer service, Grant. Yeah. It's the best. It's not just customer service. Yeah. It's the best customer service.
That's how you know it's not a real thing. If the argument, when you're making the argument for your customer services, but we actually do the thing. That's how you know it's not real. Because if it was real, you'd be able to simply make an objective statement. So for instance, customer service is a lazy amalgamated idea. And there are things that make up the idea of customer service that actually are important to a customer. For instance, giving someone your cell phone number. That is an objective, explicit idea. It says, here's my cell phone number. You can call me anytime. That's customer service. Or every person that works in our call center used to work in the field. So they can relate to you. They're like, oh, thank God. That's right. Right. And so it's those types of things that actually do make up customer service, but we don't say them, probably because there's 40 of them. And so which of those 40 things do we talk about? Well, that's kind of what our process is built for. It's like, we'll tell you which of those 40 things you actually need to say and which of those things no one cares about.
Yeah. So what are some of those avoidance words that we tend to use in B2B? I mean, you touched on customer service, like high quality. What are other words that we might be using day to day and we think are perfectly fine? That are just trash words, that are just filler words, that are yellow indicators or red indicators that we really need to dig a little bit deeper?
The worst are the trifecta, which is quality, customer service, and trust. Those should never come out of your mouth ever.
So here's the homework assignment. Everybody go read your website homepage and see how many times those words show up on your homepage. And if they show up, you might need to do a little bit more messaging and positioning work, huh? Is that right, Grant?
I mean, they're absolutely losing you money. And people don't understand the opportunity cost of words, right? Humans create value based on ideas. And if you say a thing, if you say, hey, I'll give you my cell phone, or you're going to get the cell phone number of your account director and you can call them anytime. And if that's really valuable to them because their prior experiences or nobody's doing anything close to that, their prior experience says, I could never get a hold of anybody. You just nailed it, right? So basically, if you just sold somebody, a good salesman can recognize that and know that they need to shut up. Because the next thing that probably comes out of their mouth is going to mathematically decrease the probability of them getting a deal. So if you can say the right things and only the right things, it's cheating. But when you don't know, you just say a bunch of stuff. And so that's why people say, like, boy, if I say quality, that way I only have to use one word instead of the potentially 10 or 15 different words or ideas that I don't know which of those things are going to really resonate. So that's why we use these lazy words, but they don't mean anything in the brain. They have no place to go in the file folder.
It probably comes out of too when we're trying to be the same thing to like multiple different groups instead of trying to be like, I'm talking to this specific person in our audience.
Well, that's different. I mean, that's a totally different layer of variables that you just put down. Okay. So I can show you lots of examples of situations where an organization actually did have a really good value proposition for a CEO, for instance. Okay. So I'm B2B only here. So the CEO is like, that's what they want to hear. And and we get the data back and we say, you nailed this value prop. It's top 3 for a CEO. Here's the problem. The door opener is not the CEO, right? The person that your salespeople are talking to are head of facilities or, a VP or somebody like that. And that thing doesn't matter to them. So what happens is you're training your salespeople to come in and say the right thing to the wrong person, and they're screwing the folks are falling out of the funnel and they can't figure out why. Because I talk to our clients who ends up being a CEO, they say it's this and they nail it, right? And they've got enough reps to know that that's valuable. But the problem is they don't know that the entry point has a whole different, because we're humans, the entry point has a whole series of different value propositions that they could be using.
Yeah. Another place I see this a lot in our world is, we talk a lot about, we need to talk about our customers' problems. We need to articulate our value in terms of the problems that our customers have and how we can make them go away. But I see that translate a lot in the B2B marketing message as generic problems. Like take our business, right? We're a digital agency for B2B companies. A lot of our competition, and we do it too, will say, hey, they need more pipeline. That's the problem. Well, that's so generic. It doesn't really relate to the buyer. Like, well, sure, I do. Everybody needs more pipeline. We have to we got to be willing to dig a little deeper and find that relatable problem that really connects to the gut. It's like, yeah, I need pipeline, but, I also need to keep my job. And I don't know how in the world I can take these people that are coming to our webinars and turn them into pipeline. That's my problem. And I don't know how to solve that. So instead of it just being, hey, you're having a hard time generating pipeline, it's how do we dig a little bit deeper and find out what are those real root issues that are causing their pipeline not to grow. And that's the problem that we need to talk about. And it's the same idea as quality or customer service. There's these easy problem words or phrases, but those aren't the ones that are going to resonate with our buyer.
No, and most of it comes back to what I said earlier, is around managing uncertainty. If you can figure out a way to manage, and when I say I'm listening for like, what are they afraid of? The common things that you'll see is when somebody says, "Oh, we need to do a campaign." Well, what does that mean? That means, well, first of all, the funnel's no good, but what's the fear behind that really? And the fear could be, well, we really don't know what messages that we should be using, so we're going to run a series of campaigns. We want to A/B test them. Oh, we need more leads. Well, what does that really mean? Like, well, exactly I don't really understand our current audience quality or how we should be positioning ourselves. Or, hey, we need a rebrand. Be like, you mean you're not confident about your relevance or how you're differentiated in the market? Or, we need better messaging. Be like, that means you're really not certain as to what things your customers value, right? So all of the tactics that people ask for, there's fear behind all of them. You just have to listen and figure out what those are.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great segue into our next section, which is how do we translate? And we've touched on this a little bit, but translating what buyers care about, now that we've kind of got an understanding of that, into actual messaging. Like, what are the systems or frameworks or the ways that we boil all this down and say it back to a customer in a way that would make them stop scrolling, pay attention to our article, read our blog? How do we turn this into where the rubber meets the road, Grant?
Well, if you are uncertain, if you really want to know the rubber meets the road, I'm only hesitating because I don't want to be self-promotive, but we built years ago a widget that allows us to figure these things out. if you understand the beliefs and motivations behind your customer, everything else is easy. All the execution points are easy. Like, what do we do next is easy. And if you don't, any direction is acceptable, right? We could call it the Cheshire Cat moment, right? Any path is acceptable, even if it's the wrong one. You have no idea. So if you could truly understand what your customers expect, what their beliefs are, what is important to them, that's absolute cheating. And it is an easy way to do it. Are there tricks about doing it correctly? Sure. So for instance, communicate simply, right? I had a mentor years ago that said, clarity above cleverness always. And that is 100%, the psychology 100% supports that. If you can be clear, you will be surprised at how much more effective that is than being clever. I thought for years, one of my favorite taglines was Geico. Do you remember what Geico's original tagline was?
No.
15 minutes will save you 15% or more in car insurance. On a sexiness scale, that's a 1 or a 2 out of 100. I mean, there is nothing sexy. There is nothing cool. There is nothing clever about that. But what it is incredibly clear. Mm-hmm. And look at what happened. I mean, they plastered the airwaves, and it was one of the fastest growing companies for a decade. So clarity is key. It doesn't have to be sexy. If you use confusing words, expect your customer to be confused.
Right. So, especially buzzwords that we think are important, right? We just have to cut through and get to the brass tacks. I love last year you kind of talked about how positioning can be like a math equation. Do you remember talking about that last year? And how, you start with a category and then you focus on, when you're trying to say this is what we do, you start. Do you remember this, Grant, or am I reaching out?
I know where you're going. Everything to me is a math equation. So that's an unfair question to ask me, but yes, right? Like, so everything can be analyzed. Everything. Anything can be measured. We measure people's weird ideas and instincts all the time, can tell them if something's going to work or it's not going to work before they try it. But yes, it absolutely can be a math equation if you have the right methodology to use the numbers.
Awesome. Well, hey, I'm noticing that we're kind of getting at the top of the hour. We got about 5 or 10 more minutes. Are there some actionable things, Grant, that, we've been talking about this concept of neuroscience and why the ways we try to think about the words that matter to our customers inside the walls of our business doesn't resonate as well. We've talked about theory. We've covered a lot of things today. What are some practical things, like the people that are watching and listening in today? What are something that they can go do later on this week, next week, after the holidays, to start getting their team thinking more about how to create words that are going to matter to their audience?
Well, so we kind of use a fun exercise. It's not fun. It's just a simple one. The exercise really is just write down the five things that you think are the reasons that your customers are doing business with you. And then understanding that the math would likely play out that 2 of those things aren't important to them at all. 1 or maybe 2 of them are the real drivers. Can you identify what those 1 or 2 things are on that list of 5, and how confident are you in your answer? Now, if your answer's above 8%, just know that you're doing better than most folks. Even though in reality, obviously, if you're only writing down 5 things, you have a 20% chance of guessing correctly. But it is very, very. It's much harder to identify what that thing is, because you're almost asking yourself what someone else is feeling, and we don't know that, right? Unless that's your spouse or something, and you know them so innately well that you can kind of tell what they're thinking or what they're feeling, but nobody knows their customer that well, not even close. So, and then not only that, not to know them at scale is even harder. So identifying that is really, really hard. Write those things down and cross off the ones that you think aren't resonant, that are the 2 that aren't important, and the 2 that really are. I also want to encourage everyone to understand that sales is, especially B2B, right? Everybody overthinks B2B sales. We do a lot of work in that space, and it's so much more simple than folks think. They make it so hard on themselves. And it's really about alleviating uncertainty. That is the greatest hack in closing a sale in B2B, is identifying and mitigating uncertainty.
Now, is there a way for a seller to get to uncertainty, or is that something that we have to go do research or talk to customers to understand where that uncertainty comes from? So if I'm a seller and maybe I don't have great research and I'm just out there knocking on doors, is there an easy way for me to get to uncertainty with a customer? Yeah.
So if anybody follows Sandler method, right? Sandler method is just Socratic method, right? I mean, it's been around for, hundreds of years. Like, it's not, thousands of years technically, I guess. But Socratic method works because you're just asking questions in order to get people to divulge information. Now, the trick isn't just getting them to tell you, because they'll say things like, well, we really need a website. So what, or whatever it is you're trying to do, just using the example you were using earlier. We're like, oh, cool. I can sell them a website. And they'll probably say yes. Nope. Slow down. You're missing a step, which is, why a website, right? There's some uncertainty that exists that makes them believe that building a website is the thing that they need to do. Now, most salespeople will never ask that question, because what they just heard was money. And I'm not going to talk them out of, they just gave me permission to talk them into buying a website. Why in the world would I ever talk them out? So just realize that you can do that. But if you press and you figure out why they need a website, you move yourself up in their decision-making chain, and you become somebody that is trusted back here in their brain, which you want. And if you just say yes and build them a website, you become vendor, right? And so it depends on if you want to make a short-term sale or make a long-term relationship. So that's the real key, is to figure out.
In today's world, the B2B seller hears, I want a website, and they start going, well, gosh, these are all the cool things that our websites do. That's so awesome that you want a website. It does this. We have a content management system, and it does that. And you can, it's got WYSIWYG and this and that and the other thing. And if they just asked, why do you need a website? When it comes down to that cost of inaction situation, like Jen was talking about last month, the seller would, if they know the answer to that question, they can connect the dots back and go, well, hey, when you told me this is why you needed a website because of A, B, and C, is A, B, and C still important? And if it is, then this is really the right way to go, because you didn't have A, B, and C before. That's why you called me and asked for a website.
That's right. And if you're a salesperson, the faster you say yes, the lower margin you have, period. So if you find out why they want a website, you can still sell them the website, but you can also figure out that they're really not confident in their funnel. And so there's an opportunity for you to sell them something else that allows them to identify. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to figure out where all the inconsistencies are in your funnel and how we can drop more of that to the bottom line. And then we're going to build the website that's going to reflect that new funnel. So you maybe just doubled your margin just by asking that one question.
Yeah, exactly. And we can do that in our marketing messages too. I mean, if we can take this, instead of saying we sell websites on our website, we can talk about, these are the problems that our websites can help you solve and help you do whatever it is you're trying to accomplish with your business. That's way better messaging than just saying we sell websites, right? So Grant, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always fun to have you on the show. For those of you that have been watching along, thank you guys for joining us. In the agenda that we shared, there's a link to Grant's website. There's a link to Grant's LinkedIn profile. Be sure to follow Grant. DM him if you do, and let him know that you heard about him, discovered him here on the B2B Growth Show. There's also a link to he's got some really excellent articles on his website. We put that down in the resource section of the agenda. So be sure to check him out there. Also, next month, we've got Rand Fishkin on the show. You're not going to want to miss that. You can go ahead and sign up for the June B2B Growth Show right there off of the agenda. And guys, thank you for your time. Grant, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great show as always, and hopefully we can talk you into coming back next year. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. See you guys.